Welcome back to Humans of Ethereum. In this episode, I have a very fun and engaging conversation with the one and only Hudson Jameson. Hudson is one of the few humans in Ethereum who genuinely needs no introduction, and I'm sure his name and face are very familiar to most of you from various social media channels. He chairs the bi-weekly All-Core Devs call, and in that capacity serves as sort of a liaison between the All-Core Devs community and the Ethereum Foundation, which he's been a member of for a long time on one hand, and the broader Ethereum community on the other. As a central, well-respected figure of the Ethereum community and someone who's been part of the community and really quite central to it for a very long time. As you can imagine, Hudson has a lot of very interesting and well-informed and broad opinions on all the topics. So we talk about funding, we talk about the role of the Ethereum Foundation and the future of the project, and lots of other awesome stuff. Without further ado, let's dive into episode 11 of Humans of Ethereum featuring Hudson Jameson. Hey Hudson, how's it going?
Hey, it's going really well. How are you?
Awesome. On my way to Berlin later today for Berlin Blockchain Week. Excited about that, but sad that you won't be there.
I know, I had to miss it this time, but I will be at DevCon for sure.
Sweet. We are going to have such a ridiculous amount of fun in Osaka this year. I'm like so stoked. And actually, this is a big deal for you, right? Because you're, if I remember correctly, you're not working this one. Is this like the first one you...
Yeah, this is the first DevCon that I'm not working since DevCon 1, because I didn't attend DevCon 0.
That's kind of a big deal. I feel like it's, I'm trying to think of a fun analogy. It's kind of like, you know, if you're always in the crew for like, you know, a theater production or something, and then like, you know, you actually like try sitting in the audience for once, you're like, oh my God, this is such a different experience.
Oh yeah, I'm totally anticipating it being a different experience, and I'm excited because the team that Aya and others have put together this year for DevCon is pretty strong, so I don't really have a huge concern about it being like bad without me or anything. It'll go very smooth.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. The sort of production quality has gone up and up. I mean, I've only seen two. I've only have 2 data points so far, DevCon 3 and DevCon 4, but everything I've seen and heard this year is shaping up to be like the biggest and best by far. I totally skipped like the intro part, but like I'm not actually sure that you need an introduction in the Ethereum community. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do one anyway.
So do that. So tell us who you are in whatever way you know you think answers the human question the best, like who are you as a human, but in particular tell us a bit of background. Tell us like what you were doing, like go back as far back as you want. Tell us kind of what you were doing prior to the rabbit hole, and yeah, we'll go
Sure. So yeah, I'm Hudson Jameson. I currently work at the Ethereum Foundation doing community work, the All-Core Devs meetings and EIP editing. I do some operations stuff and some DevOps at the foundation, as well as security. So as a nonprofit, just kind of whatever they need me to do, they just throw me in there, and I get stuff done. As far as my history, I guess I grew up in Northeast Texas, and as a kid, I was really anxious. Like I had different anxiety disorders and stuff. So I didn't really have friends until late middle school, early high school. Until then, the computer was my friend. So I got on Yahoo groups and Cartoon Orbit and Zanga and all those other ones, would play around with HTML and CSS like a lot of early developers would start doing. And I kind of came out of my shell in high school and college, and attended the University of North Texas with a computer science degree, made it through that, and then worked for 2 years at USAA, which is a bank and insurance company in the US, doing some mainframe development. And I actually became the blockchain, the lead blockchain, I guess, person for the team and the innovation group at USAA. So, an important piece is when I found out about blockchain. So back in 2011, I was at college, and it was the summer of 2011. And I was reading online somewhere, I forgot where, but I ran across Bitcoin, and I was going through a hard libertarian phase of my life. And so
is that not like a thing that a lot of North Texans have in common?
like, Yeah, there's actually there are a pretty good amount of libertarians up here, but and there's nothing wrong with being a libertarian as long as you're a nice person. It's just that many of them I've met are like rich white assholes. So yeah. Anyways, going back to the story, I basically ran into Bitcoin from reading online forums about it, and I started mining on a couple of my computers, CPU mining, and visiting the forums, and being really. I basically just sunk my summer into Bitcoin and all the stuff that I could do with it. I mined about half a Bitcoin, and after that, I just kept following it through college. I had a professor that went down the rabbit hole with me at the time and let me do a lot of experiments. And I even did a project where I bought an ASIC and showed how it was working and mining through that. I think that was 2013 or 2014. Had one of those like little ASICs that I kind of put in a dishwasher or a dish drying rack and like put my own fans on there and kind of made my own little like jank case for it. Um,
I love it. I had this image just now of literally an ASIC miner inside a dishwasher. I was like, does that like somehow
no,
increase
no,
the efficiency?
dishwashing rack.
I
Although
get
if
it.
it was in a
Yeah,
dishwasher, it would dry off the dishes, I guess. But um,
yeah.
yeah, and what I was planning on doing in college after I got out was being a penetration tester or
Right.
doing network security. Like in high school, I would go war driving and play around with what whatever Kali Linux was before, Backtrack. I would play around with Backtrack and that kind of stuff. But then I'm going down the rabbit hole, like you said, caused me to just obsess over it. And I did everything I could while at USAA to kind of get involved in whether it be writing patents for USAA on blockchain or doing little experiments and things like that. So a
Let's yeah,
big
let's oh, I was gonna say
go ahead.
let's just pause there for a quick second, then we can come back and pick it up and get into the Ethereum part as well. The first thing I wanted to say was what you said about not having a lot of friends growing up and how you kind of came out of your shell like around college time. It's funny like that. I was exactly the same. That like resonates actually very strongly for me. And this is the kind of thing I was saying. I love that these things come out in these conversations because we hadn't spoken about that before. But I think that that's something a lot of us in this community have in common. And it reminds me of something, Hudson, that you told me that has stuck with me literally to this day. And I wonder if you know what I'm getting at here. It was the first time I hosted one of the All Core Devs calls without you. And I was feeling super anxious and super terrified about doing it. I remember like it's such second nature now, but like I was like, I need my fast internet connection. I think I was on the road at the time. I was like, okay, I need like multiple monitors so I can do this and do that at the same time, the streaming and everything. And you were like, Lane, calm down. Everyone in Ethereum is awkward as fuck. And you have nothing to be worried about because like if you screw up, no one will even notice or care. And that's very true. So I just thought that that's an interesting part of your story that it's something many of us have in common.
Yeah, that we're all really awkward, and I
Yeah.
mean, there's not a lot of judgment that I've found within. Well, I mean, there's some judgment you find, but it's mainly the toxic people. So,
Yeah, that's true. I told the EWASM team, we were having a conversation once about this, and I said something about the fact that I'm an introvert in the traditional sense of the word, which means that I just get exhausted. Like I'm social, I'm outgoing, I like people, but it really exhausts me. And someone on the team looked at me and they were like, wow, if you're an introvert, what does that make the rest of us? um,
I've heard a similar thing amongst my friend group. I'm probably one of the more outgoing, but I
yeah.
definitely need my time at home.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's something many of us have in common as well. And actually, it's funny, like introverts band together, and I think we tend to, what was I going to say? We tend to be builder types, right? Whereas the extroverts tend to be more social, gregarious, like kind of traditional kind of business person types. It's just interesting. It's something else that I think unites many people in this community. And I think that if you understand that, you'll understand a lot more about why Ethereum is the way it is, both the tech as well as like the community.
Hmm.
Yeah, the other thing you said that resonated strongly for me was the hacking and the like war driving and war chalking. I was doing some of that stuff as well. So
Yeah.
it's funny. Rick Dudley actually had a thread on crypto Twitter today talking about how the like phone freaking movement gave way to like the hacking movement, which gave way to like hacktivism, and sort of out of that in some sense was born like the cypherpunks, and then there's like kind of Bitcoin and blockchain, and later Ethereum came along. So we have like this like lineage, and it's interesting to see how folks such as you and I like touched earlier parts of that as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What when you first discovered Bitcoin, which was super early based on what you said, like do you remember at all what that moment felt like, your like quote unquote rabbit hole moment? Like I remember my like Ethereum rabbit hole moment.
Um, I don't remember like a specific moment in time, but I would say that around that time, the feelings were this is a really ambitious project, and this is something that is really needed because at least in the US, when you learn about where the money comes from and how it's printed and who decides that, it just kind of it just seems so dysfunctional that you want something that's more stable. And it really honed in on this, the cryptography that I was learning in college at the time. And it just really resonated with me as something different, ambitious, and pretty revolutionary. I definitely talked at the time, my girlfriend, now my wife's, ear off about it to where like became a rule that I could not talk about Bitcoin anymore just because I kept harping on about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Laura's been a good sport. I remember when I met her at DevCon. She, I guess, sometimes tags along to some of these events, but it's really nice to have a partner who's obviously like supportive, but also like not drinking as much Kool-Aid as you and I are
oh
sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, and in fact, the other day we were doing a 14-hour drive from Indianapolis.
Wow.
We went to Gen Con. We had some friends in the car, and I said, "Okay, I was fighting with someone the other day about what the term bailout meant." And then we
I
got
saw
into an
that.
hour-long conversation. So then me and Laura and our friends got into an hour-long conversation where I explained the whole history of the DAO and the hack, and uh, I basically said, "Is this a bailout?" And they were
Hmm.
like, "This is a hard one," but they eventually came to their own opinions on it, and it was just really interesting to get the outsider's perspective,
Yeah.
like because you hardly hear that unless you have friends outside of Ethereum.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I hope many or all of us have friends outside of kind of Ethereum, crypto, blockchain, et cetera. But like it scares me sometimes because at least in my case, I have two modes of existence, right? I'm like, there's travel mode, which is like plus or minus like half the time. And I'm like super social when I'm traveling, but it's obviously all to crypto events. And so it's all like Ethereum and crypto people. And then when I'm home, I just want to like shut out the world and go heads down and actually get stuff done. And so like, it just scares me how little time I've spent with the sort of pre-crypto friends. So this is like a good reminder to everyone out there, like public service announcement, get out there and like, I mean, I think you do a good job of this because you go to like other events and stuff, right? But spend time with your like pre-crypto friends.
Yep. It's good to get different perspectives for sure.
Super important. Cool. Yeah, let's keep going with the story. So you were, if I remember correctly, you were saying like lead blockchain architect at USAA. So what happened from that point on?
Basically, I was just getting married or had just gotten married. I was getting my first house and I was starting to get into Ethereum. Specifically, I had read Nick Szabo's stuff on smart contracts before, and
Cool.
that really inspired me about 2014 to start digging into that more.
Yeah.
And that's when I ran across the white paper Vitalik wrote, and it just clicked. I was like, programs on a blockchain, that why aren't we already doing that? And it just excited me as much as or more so than when I found Bitcoin. So I kept following Ethereum. I was getting involved in Reddit early on. Um, had some posts on there. I remember there was like a thread where it was like, I want to come up with this ERC20 standard. Like, what should we have in there? And I put a few things in there. None of them were good ideas, but it was still cool to participate in these early conversations. But the big turning point, I think, was late 2015, I believe. DevCon 1 happened in London. And I didn't have I was just, still pretty new at the job. I didn't have a ton of money saved up. So I was like, oh, I really want to go. And USA wouldn't pay for me to go. So, because it wasn't
Sure.
even though it was ancillary, it was overseas and
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So I called my dad and I was like, hey, this is like really important for me. Can I have some cash to fly to London and I'll stay at a hostel and it'll be real cheap? And he was like, oh, this sounds like a dream moment. Yeah, you should definitely go and
That's
here's some money.
amazing.
So
That's amazing.
saved up some of my own, got some help from parents, and were able to go to London, stayed in a hostel. I think Niran Balboa was like in the same hostel room as me, but I didn't know it at the time because there was like 6 to 9 people in there. Um, I had just met Piper Merriam, who wasn't working with Ethereum yet, and
Yep.
we were the first Ethereum people we had met in real life. Um,
Wow.
which was well, and I had met people, I guess, locally who knew about Ethereum, but this is the first like very active Ethereum contributor that we met each other.
Got it.
Um, Martin Swende was like behind me. in the crowd, and I didn't know him at the time. And when I got to DevCon 1, I saw that they were very much lacking volunteers.
Yeah.
So first day, I jumped in, got the badges, like they were getting printed and stuffed into plastic containers, and I was like, oh, I can help with this. So I just jumped behind the desk and started helping, and then I got put in charge of t-shirts, and then I got put in charge of scheduling and timekeeping. And so I didn't see hardly any talks all at DevCon because I was just running around. But that's okay because I got to meet behind the scenes like Vlad and Vitalik for the first time,
Yeah.
and the guys from Oracle Eyes, and people who worked at like Deloitte and stuff, where I got to be friends with them, and they were like, oh, I wish I could leave Deloitte, or I wish I could leave this big corporate company. And now looking back, almost all of them did that, left their
Wow.
company and started their own, most of them. So
Wow.
after I left there, the executive director at the time, Ming Chan, noticed how hard I was working, and we kept up over email and Skype. And early 2016, she offered me a job working at the foundation, and I was able to take that by the summer. So I've been at the foundation since the summer of 2016, and it's been a great time.
That's so cool. Something else I didn't know we had in common, like, so my entry point to the Ethereum community after, like reading the white paper and like, kind of dabbling around on online forums a little bit was DevCon 3, right? So exactly 2 years after the DevCon 1 that you're describing. I was also there as a volunteer, and Ming also gave me a ton of stuff to do and offered me a job after that. So that's kind of funny how we have that kind of
in
common.
Totally.
I'm sure you had as many long, deep Skype conversations with her as I did.
Yep, totally.
Let's talk about DevCon for a few more minutes, because I think timing-wise, this episode may actually go live. We'll try to get this live like kind of just around the time of DevCon 5 in Osaka, if not maybe slightly sooner. So you're one of the very few humans who went to DevCon 1, 2, 3, and 4, and of course will be at DevCon 5. What, like from your perspective, like how has DevCon evolved over time?
So it's definitely grown in number of people. For sure. I'm going to get these numbers a little bit off, but it was 300 to 400 people DevCon 1. I think it was about 60 people DevCon 0, although I wasn't there. And then that doubled into 800 to 900-ish people DevCon 2. Then it got to 1,800 or 1,500 around there DevCon 3. DevCon 4 had at least 2,000 to 2,500 people. And then DevCon 5, I'm guessing it'll nearly double, but I'm not sure of that actually. I don't know what their projections are. So it's grown in size. I'd say that the earlier DevCons felt more intimate for sure, but that's kind of just the way that conferences like this go.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird because the people that were at DevCon 1, who we were just kind of all meeting each other, and you could walk around, or now some of them are just like celebrity blockchain people who like started their own companies and now have like all these millions of dollars in ICO funds, and you see them walking around DevCon and people are stopping them to take pictures and stuff. And it's just kind of cool because I was like, oh yeah, I had like a burrito with that guy during DevCon 1, and now they're like doing this cool project that I get to interact with in the real world. And like being able to say that I was there during the time of the DAO when it was like getting popular, and knew a lot of the curators and stuff like that. It's just really cool to be able to say that the people who were back then are still coming to DevCon today. There's not a lot of turnover in the Ethereum community. People really stick around. Some people kind of come on through, but if you've worked in Ethereum for over a year, I find that you don't leave the community after that. You get sucked in, and it's like a trap.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Just thinking in my own memory, and of course I've only been part of this community for slightly less than 2 years, so slightly less perspective, but I definitely know the effect you're talking about. But at the same time, I feel like people who were involved in the project very early, like kind of pre-sale, most of them, it seems to me, are not still around. And just to give you one concrete example, I somehow landed on like a version of the Ethereum ICO webpage recently, and there were like something like 30 bios listed on the page of like the sort of team members at that point in time. Obviously Vitalik was one of them, and obviously Vitalik is still around. But I think there was, of those 30, there's only like one or two faces I recognize from that list. And I'm just wondering, yeah, like maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe that's not representative for some reason. Maybe this effect kicked in later. Like, what your thoughts are?
Yeah, I think the effect definitely kicked in later, and it's less for founders of Ethereum because a lot of them moved on to different blockchain projects because they're more serial entrepreneurs.
Sure.
A lot of them, but I would say that those that did stick around more from a community perspective have kept up with stuff, even if they're not the most actively involved. I probably should have worded that slightly differently, but even if they're not the most actively involved, I think that they still keep at least like kind of just their hand out to like feel around for the updates in the community and stuff like that. And some of them, some of them were only in it for the money, especially during the ICO stuff, so they're not
Sure.
around anymore. But
Sure.
yeah, it definitely has. I think Ethereum has staying power as does the community around Ethereum. So
Yeah, to your
um,
point,
yeah,
what you said a moment ago, both about developers sticking around as well as about people who, I think you said something like people who stick around for a year tend to stick around. I don't know if you saw this. I think it's called Electric Capital. This investment company released a report a few days ago, and that's kind of what they said. They said developers who are more active, who contribute on the order of, I don't know the exact number, like 10 times a month or 10 times a week, as opposed to like, one time a week or one time a month or something, are much more likely to remain active over the long term, even in spite of like the bear market and crypto winter and everything, which totally is like in line with expectations.
yep, absolutely. And I think you were asking about DevCon. What are some other, I
Yeah.
guess,
So other than like just pure scale in terms of like number of people, like how else do you think DevCon has evolved?
I think that the I think the talks have become a little less uh, like moonshot. Some of them are still moonshot, but like just because of how early it was, like everything was, this is how we want to build it, but nothing was built yet. All the stuff about DAOs, all the stuff from like Slockit with their IoT programs, the stuff from MakerDAO. Maker was at DevCon 1, and they were kind of one of the bigger, like well-funded and well-approached or well-documented dApps at the time that were being built, and they were building things like resources for the community and stuff like that. So besides MakerDAO, Slockit and other ones were communities and groups of people who I felt were doing a lot for having these moonshot kind of ideas, these
Yeah.
ideas that are really out there. And now a lot of people are copying other people, and I don't know if we're running out of ideas or if like there's just less to work with because of the restraints of the technology. And I haven't thought about it too much, but I know some things there that just make it seem a little less sparkly sometimes.
That's a really interesting point. So let's dig into this a tiny bit because I agree with you. Again, with you obviously have the benefit of far more perspective than I do here, but I think I caught the tail end of the sparkliness at DevCon 3. Like I definitely my recollection now of the feeling in the room at DevCon 3 was like electricity in the air. Like it
Hmm.
was the first time I heard of like ZK Snarks and ZK Starks, and there was all these like crazy ideas floating around. I definitely get the sense that there's like the community is a bit more sanguine and just kind of realistic about what we can do and how long things are going to take today. And I think that's like there's two sides to that, right? Like it's good because we're maturing and we're kind of like adults and we're like, okay, like moonshots are nice, but like maybe we want to build some real sustainable businesses and maybe we need to like reduce our uh, ambitions a tiny little bit. But obviously there's like a sad side to that as well, because like I think what attracted me to Ethereum in the beginning was the moonshot stuff. Yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that we are getting more realistic, and I think what the big thing that happened was we went from these ideas not like the price of ether being super 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 low, so it was like, well, this isn't going to make mainstream for a lot of years. And then when cryptocurrency in general blew up, we felt really unprepared for making this mainstream because we were unprepared for making this mainstream. So
Yeah,
now we're at this phase where it's like we want usable crypto today, whereas before we were saying we want big ideas. So I
sure.
think that's the difference where, like you said, we're more realistic now, but then beyond that, we also want it to be more widely used than before when it was like like more of an experiment.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think when there's more at stake, like there is today, like billions of dollars, like this certainly wasn't the case before, then by necessity, like people start acting more, what's the word I'm looking for? Taking less risks, acting more like responsibly, or yeah, I can't find the perfect word. Um, I don't know how to feel about that, to be honest. Like, uh, I go back and forth on this point. Like this manifests itself in funny ways. Like with all core devs and just core development in general, we want to be able to make breaking changes, and like even like quasi breaking changes, like what caused Constantinople to be postponed, right? Which was like the decreasing the gas cost for like S store.
Hmm.
And like even something as basic as decreasing the gas cost is like you can't do it anymore because there's like deployed applications that are like relying on it that are securing value. So it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, that happened the other day at the yeah, we had an all our core devs call yesterday or last night, depending on where you are, and it was interesting because we were talking about how much to lower. I think it was S load or S store
Yeah.
gas cost, and people were like, "Well, what if that breaks contracts that like that assume that it was going to be
Right.
this much?" And I made the point that ever since the beginning, there's almost been this edict that due to security or usability like improvements, the gas cost might change. They're never going to be guaranteed to always be the same.
Right.
And I said, if you're a smart dApp developer, you know that. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And I've never heard backlash whenever we've changed gas prices beyond the security implications of it.
If you're a smart contract developer, I like
Yeah,
that. um, as a general statement, do you feel that, because this is a topic that's come up a few times in the past few months, do you feel that like the pace of innovation in Ethereum has slowed?
I feel like the pace of innovation in Ethereum has somewhat slowed, and I think there's a few reasons for that. I think, and you said in the past months, right?
I remember this narrative picking up around like early 2019, early this year. That's the first time I heard people talking about it. Yeah.
I think part of it is an issue with everybody who has a cool idea being able to get funding because we are in a downturn as far as that goes.
Sure.
I would say that it also has to do with people getting pulled into these teams that have lucrative amounts of money that they can pay someone 250, 300, $400,000 if they're an expert in something. And so there's less room for people who are passionate and intelligent to do their own thing because they're sucked in by all these other really, really great opportunities they have. So there's almost not enough people for the amount of ideas and requirements and needs that this community has for the future.
Yeah, I agree very strongly with that sentiment. If it is the case that the pace of innovation has slowed, or that like upgrades are not happening as frequently as we'd like, um, we have this naive reaction. I've been guilty of this in the past as well, to say, okay, well, we need more money, right? Like if only we had an extra, $100,000, $1 million, $10 million, whatever that number is, and we could hire more developers, and people be more motivated, et cetera. But like the place I've landed as I've thought about this deeply and talked to a lot of people in the ecosystem is that it's like money helps, but like turning money into good code, as you know, is like really, really hard.
Yep.
And I think I think really people is what I'm trying to get at. People are the limiting factor. Good people, experienced developers, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and again, like other things being equal, yes, like having more money to offer people is good, but there's obviously we want missionaries, not mercenaries argument, and like there just isn't that like large a pool of blockchain developers in the world today. So like you could like offer twice the money, but it's not clear that like it takes years for people to like retrain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should hopefully get more blockchain developers from cryptocurrency projects that end up not doing as well, like
Sure.
EOS and other ones. And so whenever that happens, hopefully, because I think they were losing the most, according to that report, I think they were losing the most developers over time. Like they were having the most stagnation.
I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting. Okay. I was going to ask something like, do you think EOS is going to fail? But I actually kind of don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And I don't want to, I have no desire to say bad things about other projects. So
That's true. That's true. We should avoid that.
um, what is your assessment of just like, I mean, I've asked some leading questions like, what were we talking about a moment ago? Like, has the pace of innovation changed or slowed, right? But like, let's rewind, like not a leading question, like just what's your assessment of how things are going overall, like the state of Ethereum kind of?
I think that things are going really well, because there's going to be this period. If you look at the grand scheme 10, 20 years from now, we're already really ahead, like much more ahead than we ever thought in the beginning. Um, and so that's almost part of the problem, that we're going so fast, and like go fast, break things is kind of what I hear a lot about how Ethereum works. But I would say that uh, because we're so far ahead, that is going to be a good thing in the long run, because stuff like ETH2 is going to be amazing, hopefully. And whenever that happens, and the rollout is supposedly happening over the next 1 to 3 years, um, that's going to change things. I think that'll be a game changer. I think that that will re-energize people, because um, when Ethereum was new and shiny, it was really like awesome to work with. And now that it's like there's other projects and stuff like Cosmos and Definity and
Sure,
Polkadot, that they're starting to take up some developer share, and
sure.
it's because they're like the newest latest thing. But then they're going to become older, and then we're going to have ETH2 come out, and then we're going to have another recycling of devs coming back to Ethereum, because it's the latest and greatest stuff. And then beyond that, looking like 10 years ahead, I want it to be invisible. So Ethereum and other blockchain protocols, I want you to be using it like you use the internet, but you don't know you're using, HTTP or IP or IPsec or any of those other protocols that are under the TCP/IP. I guess is the best example. You don't know you're using TCP/IP or UDP, but they're so integral. I want that to be automatic, like Ethereum's under the radar, under the hood.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I've heard that people say that before, and I agree with that. The best technology is like just sort of fade into the background and become invisible, um, with the asterisk that Ethereum, at least in theory, can be money. I don't want to go down the monetary
Is
premium.
Ethereum money
Yeah,
rabbit
yeah.
hole?
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. That's not what the show is about. But it has the potential to be. Let's say, right? We can agree on that. Whereas TCP/IP doesn't have that, and so like that's a trade-off, and it just makes things more complicated. And what I'm trying to say is like money will never be invisible, right?
Yep,
Um,
yep, I agree.
so that's the difference. What would you change if you could? If you could wave a magic wand and move people or resources or plans or whatever around, like what would you do differently?
I think that, hmm, that's a really good question. I think that I would have more people be less toxic on social media, Twitter, and like Reddit and stuff like that, because I think that that slows down progress. I mean, there's one thing to be trolling, and there's another to be directly attacking ideas or people,
Right.
and like saying that one project's better than another project or things like that. There should be more. If I had to wave a magic wand, I'd say less of that and more cooperation.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is probably yet another rabbit hole that we could spend hours talking about that I don't really want to go down, but I'll just add that like, yeah, I echo that sentiment. And, I've found a lot of frustration in the Ethereum community as well. They're how do I put it? I want to start by saying that like I don't actually think that crypto Twitter or Reddit are like in any way representative of the broader community. And like you probably know the community better than anyone. So like yeah, actually let's pause there for a sec. Like, do you agree or disagree with that sentiment first of all? Like the
Which
the hostility that you're describing, like I see it on Reddit and Twitter, but I don't see it in person at events. That's why I say that.
I would say that I don't see hostility as much in person. I do see sexism and homophobia in
Sure.
person, and I think that's just a broader issue and rabbit hole to go down with just technology in general. But I would say that we need to do everything we can to make sure it's becomes not pervasive within our ecosystem as much as it already has.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That's a super good point. I think sort of I always refer to Ethereum as like a big tent, and I think that inclusivity is very, very important to me and to you and to many other people. And I know that not everyone agrees with that.
Yeah, definitely.
um, Another rabbit hole. Yeah, I mean, I think what I get the sense of is that there's sort of a party line in Ethereum, right? And the party line, and like this is not necessarily a bad thing. But it's like proof of stake is amazing, and ETH2 is going to change the world. And oh boy, ETH is money, like this whole set of like principles and beliefs and things. And if you like kind of question that or disagree with it or poke the bear, so to speak, like even in a constructive kind of respectful way, there's this like massive backlash in places like Twitter. And that's to me quite frustrating. And it's a reason I've been spending less time on crypto Twitter recently and like feeling much happier as a result.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. I got into an argument in a chat room, which wasn't like a bad argument, but
Yeah,
it was more a discussion in a chat room because I was like, you know, everyone says ETH is money, but I kind of see it as a necessary token for gas to run the network. So it's more like oil or
sure.
something like that. And like it could be money, like you could trade it like you trade oil, but like I see it
Right.
more like that. And that's the original idea. And there was even an EIP to make it so that, that you could run smart contracts with other tokens. I think it was called
Hmm.
account abstraction.
Yep.
Um,
Actually, I think those might be two different things, but yes, I remember the EIP you're talking about.
mhm. And so like they were like, well, yeah, there was that EIP, but
Yeah.
now ETH has changed and the narrative is that it's money. And I was like, if I had my choice, I might not make it that narrative, but I've accepted that that is the direction that a lot of people want to take that. And it can be multiple things.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I agree it can be multiple things to multiple people, and Ethereum is like this. How do I describe it? It's like this illusion, and like 10 different people see it from 10 different angles and see 10 different things, which I think is part of the beauty about it. But like the reality is like some things are mutually exclusive. Like just to give you one example, one of the reasons I personally don't subscribe to the like ETH is money narrative is because I actually like inflation a lot. I think that if it's deployed in the right way, like a tiny amount of inflation, like 1% or even 0.1% over the course of a year, can have a massive impact. I think it can add a lot of value. It can fund developer rewards or many other things, right? Um, and so but again, like that's like ETH is money is all about like minimizing inflation, right? So like there are actually some things that are kind of mutually exclusive there.
Yep,
Um,
yep, for sure.
let's talk about the narratives because that's actually really interesting, and there's been some really fascinating articles and things written about that this year. I think Jesse Walden from Andreessen Horowitz, I hope I'm getting that right, wrote an interesting article about this. I think Nick Carter has one in the Bitcoin space about how the Bitcoin narrative has changed over time, and if I can find those, I'll include them in the show notes here. Like there was like this like world computer narrative. Well, actually, even before that, I heard rumors that there was like a better Bitcoin narrative or something. And then there's kind of like the world computer narrative. And now we have kind of this DeFi narrative. And like maybe there have been others in between. Like you've been in the community long enough. How have you seen the narrative evolve?
I never saw so there was a narrative that ETH is better than Bitcoin, but that's been around for the longest time, but it's never been a majority of people. So it's definitely there, but it's not a majority. And then World Computer, that was one of the earliest ones I heard and the one that kind of clicked with me the most. Um, and yeah, you kind of named the main
We
ones:
had
ETH is money, DeFi.
if I remember correctly, last year it was all about nifties and NFTs and collectibles and things like that for some like brief, like a hot minute kind of, right?
Yeah, it was all about nifties, or I don't even know. I basically skip over certain like things, and that was one of the ones I skipped over. There was also I skipped TCRs entirely, token creative registries. Like I don't even know what one is. Someone tried to explain it, and I was like, I don't know, I don't got time for this.
That's funny.
Yeah, so
Um,
then there's DeFi and ETH is money, and ETH is like money Legos, and they're kind of trying to coin terms that would make it so that you find ETH as a store of value and
right.
as a exchange of value.
Yeah, so I think it's been interesting to see how this has evolved in Bitcoin. Obviously, Bitcoin is like much older than Ethereum, right? It's been around for longer, and so like there was kind of this medium of exchange narrative early on in Bitcoin. The like, oh, like shopkeepers are going to adopt it, and we're going to be like buying our coffee in Bitcoin. And then like at some point, I think people kind of woke up to the fact that like it's never going to scale like that, and um, and then kind of this like store of value narrative sort of started, and now it's digital gold, and in parallel we have kind of like Lightning and people over there who are trying to like revive the medium of exchange one. I just think it'll be interesting to see how the Ethereum narrative evolves as well.
Yeah, I actually have a short story about the
Yeah.
Bitcoin narrative. I was at ZCon and I was sitting at a table. So ZCon is the Zcash convention that they have every year that's
So
similar to DevCon.
this would have been ZCon 0 in Montreal last
Yes,
year, right? Cool.
yes, I was at ZCon 0 and I was sitting at a table with someone from one of the more popular Bitcoin websites, like I guess applications that people were using. And I was talking to them about the narrative of Bitcoin and was saying, it used to be that it was a medium of exchange, like you could quickly like buy a coffee with it, and now
Yep.
it's a store of value. And he said, "Oh no, it's still a medium of exchange." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, that's what I subscribed to back in 2010 or 2012 or whatever.
Right.
So that's still what it is to me." And I said, "Oh no, it's changed. Like the rest of the world has decided this other thing. So you're in the minority here if you're still trying to push for that. Like it's not scaling as
Right.
much. Like they're not pushing for scalability that would allow for that and
Right.
other things." And he kind of just got this look like I need to reevaluate things, but he didn't say that. So it was very interesting how many people just are so into the technology they don't update their their perspectives based on other people's perspectives.
Yeah, that's or just objective reality. Like it's
Yeah.
just an objective reality that like Bitcoin fees, like we could debate the reasons, but Bitcoin fees are in the double digits of dollars at various points, and maybe even higher in kind of end of 2017. Like, I'm sorry, but like you're not going to go buy a cup of coffee when you have to pay $10, for the transaction fee. Obviously maybe like layer two would solve that or something. Um, but I think that speaks to just kind of maximalism and tribalism in general. And it's just kind of like you hang your hat on a particular post, a particular flag, a particular like camp or something. And like I think this happens in like politics. I think it's human nature. Even as like the world evolves, all due respect to North Texan libertarian Republican voters or whatever, like people who are like anti-immigration, like I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but like the world is changing and it's becoming more connected and there's more and more globalism, so it's the same phenomenon, I think.
Yep, I agree.
I think one of the narratives we missed is the Web3 narrative as well. Is that something that is still alive in Ethereum today? I actually thought that Gav had sort of coined that term, at least in the context of blockchain. And let's have a broader perspective here. Like actually, it's an older term than Gavin or Ethereum or blockchain at all, right? This term actually goes back to
The 2000s.
Tim Berners-Lee,
Yes.
the inventor of the web. Like he was using it to refer to the semantic web in the 2000s exactly. So it's an overloaded term in any case, and it's obviously like not something anyone has like a trademark on, but there is like the Web3 Foundation and Polkadot and stuff. So what, I guess just closing off the topic of narratives, like what would you say the Ethereum narrative right now is, both just to the community and then also to you personally?
So it depends on which community you go to. So with Reddit, it's a mix of ETH is money and, well, it depends on if you're on, so there's also different Ethereum subreddits right now. So
Right,
so
that's
like
true.
most of it is ETH is money. Same with Twitter. So if you go in the online communities, there's a lot of people shilling that in a good way. And then for me personally, I guess if you go in person to meetups and conferences, the perspective changes and it's
Right,
less about ETH is money and it's more about ETH is a revolution or ETH is a technological breakthrough
right,
or that kind of thing. And then for me personally, it's still to me a really, really cool idea and experiment that I feel like if it doesn't stay as the protocol that changes the world, it'll influence the protocol that changes the world. Kind of like I think there were battles for web standards back in the 90s, which
yep,
was I was a kid, so like I wasn't really around for that, like to cognitively understand it. But there was stuff that I've learned that not always the best technology wins.
right,
Sometimes it's the one that's the most advertised or has the best people who are
yep,
talking the best. So I think even though it can get kind of annoying to see the social media banter and a lot of the back and forth, I do think it's important to get the word out there from different narratives, including one from a technological standpoint and from a like investor monetary standpoint.
sure. That's valid. This is probably a contentious view in the Ethereum space. Not surprising. I have lots of contentious views. So going back to what we were saying earlier about having non-crypto friends, like I get the very strong impression among the non-rabbit holers, non-Kool-Aid drinkers, that number one, the vast majority of people have never heard of Ethereum. If they've heard of anything, they've heard of Bitcoin, right? Even the Bitcoin brand has been tainted by ICOs and scams and things like that, and Ethereum even more, right? So if you ask the average person, at least on the street here in New York, like I don't know if this is the case in like Dallas or other cities, right? If you ask them and on the off chance they've heard of Ethereum, they're probably going to shake their head and say that sounds like a scam to me. So I have the sense that like we have a severe branding problem in Ethereum, and I think it may be severely limiting inflows of capital and talent and stuff. Curious if you agree or disagree.
I think that is a factor. I think that's less of a factor than it just being early in general.
Sure.
I think it's just so early and so niche that unless you're in the tech space and within that, like a deeper cryptography or cybersecurity or like money exchange kind of way, then you're not going to hear about it in the first place for a lot of it.
Sure.
So I think I hope we get big enough where we don't have superstars like Vitalik anymore. I think that's when we'll know it's more universal. Or if we have multiple superstars that are up to the level of what we have for Vitalik right now.
Yeah, I would love for us not, like, all due love and respect to Vitalik, I would love for us not to need him or other superstars to like keep this community alive and going. And I think we're kind of there today. I don't know that would have been the case a year or two ago. I think we are, like, the project has
it's definitely improved. Yeah, it's definitely improved.
But the flip side of that is that so you know where I've seen this phenomenon play out? I've seen it play out with things like the Ethereum cat herders and the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians. And what I mean is, like, people like to attach a particular name and a particular face to like an initiative or a project. So I had a podcast with Boris Mann not long ago, and he was saying that, like, you know, because he helped lead the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians gatherings in Berlin and Prague last year, people would approach him and be like, oh, like, you're in charge of the Ethereum Magicians, like, pitch things to him, you know? And he's like, whoa, you know, like, not only am I not involved, I didn't even found the thing, you know, I'm just a steward, I'm just helping. And like similar things have happened with like the cat herders and other initiatives. You know what I mean? Like, there's this fallacy where we just like to have like this face of account or of record for like a particular like project, and like, for better or for worse, like, Vitalik is that person for Ethereum for now.
Absolutely. With the cat herders especially, because me and you co-founded, along with Offrey and a few other people, the cat herders, and some of them message me privately and just say, I have this idea, I think I'm going to do this, does this a good idea? And what I usually tell them is, oh, if you want my opinion, this is good or bad or whatever, but never ask me for permission to do something, just do it. Because if you're in the group, we trust you. So that's kind of where I think a lot of the leadership needs to go to, which I think Metallica is doing a great job of just saying, go and do it. Like,
yeah, that's true.
You don't need to ask permission all the time. There doesn't need to be a face to push your accountability on. Be self-accountable and do it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that very strongly. I think he's done a really fantastic job of stepping back, stepping out of the limelight, you know, pushing other people forward, as much as any leader of any similar project has ever done. And yet it's just fascinating. Even in spite of all of this, you know, he still remains like the face of Ethereum to so many people around the world. You know, obviously he deserves it, right? But yeah, I think that in some senses we need, like, Ethereum needs to outgrow Vitalik, Ethereum needs to outgrow the Ethereum Foundation, Ethereum needs to become something bigger and become more decentralized. And I just wonder, because these things are stories and stories need protagonists, like, how do we have like multiple protagonists? Interesting question.
Yep, totally. Man, I was just thinking a second ago, like, you're doing this video series, and I've been like close like 6 different times to starting an Ethereum podcast. Since I do podcasting outside of my stuff with Ethereum to kind of keep sane. Have you almost started a podcast? Because I'm just guessing you almost have before.
Oh yeah, many times. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is I think we're past the tipping point. I think it's something about the idea of having a podcast, or maybe it's the technology has gotten easier and cheaper and more accessible. There's like, they're exploding. There's like everyone in their grandpa and their, you know, childhood best friend has a podcast now, and we have this explosion of content. And on the one hand, it's wonderful, but on the other hand, I feel like we're like, you know, like, trusted news sources are like, I don't know. I don't know if there's any I trust anymore, really, you know, like maybe the New York Times, right? So we're like all the way down this like long tail of content. And I feel like instead of, you know, 10 podcasts that 10 million people listen to, we're going to have 10 million podcasts that only 10 people listen to each or something. And I'm not sure what that means for us as a species.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about.
You should totally record some episodes of Humans of Ethereum. There's a hashtag in front of it for a reason. It's a meme. I don't own it. Please, like, take the idea and run with it. Some other people are actually planning to join and start like doing interviews and stuff.
Cool. I will definitely think about that and try to get some time to do it.
Sweet. Let's talk a little bit more about community. It's something I like to talk about on these calls. And like, again, like I said, I think you're like more deeply integrated in the Ethereum community than pretty much anyone I know. It's kind of an open-ended question, but like, what is the community to you?
The Ethereum community to me is a really interesting mix of people where there are the technologists and those who are very, and within that, there are those who are heads down, like they want to build on Ethereum. And it's kind of, I think I heard this, I guess it would be an analogy before, where um, someone who is like designing compilers, like designs compilers all day, and someone walked up to them and asked, so what is this going to be used for? Like, what do you hope this thing you're building is going to be used for? And they're like, uh, I don't know.
Compiling.
I'm just building it. It's just going to
Compiling
compile.
things.
They don't necessarily, like, they have a task, they have a vision to an
Yeah.
extent, but then they don't look at the bigger picture necessarily. And then there's
Yeah.
those programmers who are more out there and they look at the bigger picture and they um, talk on Twitter more and they're more vocal. And so that's kind of the technologist side of it. And then there are the investors and people who watch for the economic and like store of value and exchange of value use cases very closely and get into things like DeFi and other narratives.
Yeah.
And just throwing this out there, I think someone said 2019 will be the year of the DAO. I'm actually thinking it's 2020.
I agree with that actually.
I think
Yeah.
there's going to be major changes and the security will finally be up to par to be able to do that. And so there are people who advocate for that kind of stuff. There are people who are like hangers on to Ethereum as well as other blockchain projects. So they're more generalist, and that's perfectly fine too. And there are people who are miners who are in it for the money. I think didn't we tried to find the community before at EIP Zero, which was a gathering in Toronto right before FCC a couple of years ago, and we just couldn't. There was just too many people, and we couldn't figure out who is with the community and who isn't. So it's such a hard thing to define. But yeah, investors, miners, multiple kinds of technologists, visionaries, people who um, just want something to like attackers who want to trick people, no coiners who want to just have discussions all day,
Sure.
and then there's Dean. So
Dean is in a category of his own.
yeah, Dean's in a category of their own. So that's the community.
Yeah, I remember the event you're talking about. EIP Zero was a lot of fun. It was in Toronto in like March, April of last year. I think it was just before ECC. And yeah, we were trying to whiteboard to like define the Ethereum community. And like I remember we very clearly we ran out of columns. We had like 6 columns, and then there were 8, and there were 10, and then we ended up like writing them down the right side of the board because we kept generating more ideas. But just to give some context, like the reason I think this is relevant at least as much today as it was then is because there are more and more contentious topics, right? So there are things like funds recovery and block rewards, all sorts of things, ProgPow, right? That are like not primarily or exclusively technical questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, for folks like you, right, as the person who chairs the core devs meetings and as well, of course, as the core developers and researchers, like it's super important for them to have some sense of like community sentiment on these things. And you hear people making these like sweeping statements all the time, like the Ethereum community has like roundly rejected XYZ. And I'm like, that's totally not the impression I've got. You know, I'm like, a lot of loud people in crypto Twitter don't like it, but I've had like dozens of private conversations where people love this or that particular idea. What's your current take on this? Like, how do you and other like core developers figure out what the heck people think?
I'm in, oh man, at least 20 Telegram chats where I'm just kind of monitoring stuff. I'm in a bunch of Gitter chats. I'm in some Skype chat rooms with different groups of people. What else? Man, there's like just so many chat programs I can't keep up. And so
Oh,
I
yeah.
try to like get opinions from people when things happen. I scan Twitter, of course, Reddit, whenever something major happens, and something for major a few different times, including for issuance reduction and for ProgPow, I made Reddit post and then cross-posted it to Twitter for people to
Right.
comment on that gave a broad overview of all of the different sides of the debate so that people could then comment on Reddit
Right.
what their position was. And not that I would do like a numerical or majority thing, but just
Sure.
look at the different viewpoints and see which ones held weight.
Yeah, so you're okay. So you have a secret formula, and I think the answer to your question here is that, on behalf of the entire community, I want to like express my gratitude, Hudson, for like this incredibly difficult community sentiment gathering work that you do. And of course, you like relay that many times, on the core dev calls and things like that. That's super important.
Mm-hmm.
I want to change gears slightly. I want to talk a tiny bit about the topic of funding. So part of the goal for this season, I guess, of Humans of Ethereum, or I'm calling them seasons, is to highlight like people and projects that are a little bit less well known and kind of like a little bit underfunded. How do you feel that we're doing with funding as an ecosystem, just in general, right now?
I think we could definitely be doing better. I think some organizations are doing it better than others. Um, they're, I don't go as far as some people do to say, if you have made a lot of money off of Ethereum, definitely give back, because it's really their choice at the end of the day.
Sure.
They should be doing it, but if they're not, then people should reflect that by supporting the project or not supporting the project, because
Sure.
that's actually going to be more valuable than money at the end of the day, or these tokens that go up and down in value. So that's how you should show your dissatisfaction or satisfaction with how a group is spending their money. There's only a few, I think it might be Aragon, but only a few companies have very transparent financial reports in general. Like most people just have to look at Ethereum addresses to like estimate how much um, money or coins or resources that people have. Um, the Ethereum Foundation, which is the one I'm going to be most familiar with, I think is doing a pretty good job of dispensing funds. There aren't always the greatest. We've had some trouble in the past, in my opinion, on having the uh, right pathways to get feedback for things like grants and funding, but that is improving over time. I'm not sure what the origins of that were or not, but I would say that I think we dedicated like 10 million to ETH1X and 30 million to research this year or something like that, which are pretty big numbers. And
So I
yeah,
saw those numbers as well. I remember I announcing that on stage at, I think it was Ethereal in New York during
yep.
Blockchain Week. But I haven't seen any follow-up like breakdown. I'm just curious, like actually ETH1X is a great example. Like 10 million is a lot of money. Like I'm not aware of EF dispensing any money aside from maybe some support of I don't know, like Alexa is doing some like important work. I know there's something there, but like where's that money going, or where is it like dog-eared or earmarked to go? Do you have any idea?
Mark. Yeah, I would say, yeah, Alexi is a good example of one of the people we're funding for 1X. As far as other projects go, I would have to dig deeper into that. I'm not as familiar, but I think that that's something we as a community can encourage the foundation to do, is to be a little bit more open about that stuff.
Sure.
Certainly.
What do you think is the role of the Ethereum Foundation today and just kind of like going forward?
Yeah, so early on, it was the group that housed all the developers for all major clients and a lot of the dApps and stuff at the very beginning, 2014, 2015 kind of
Sure.
stuff. And then co-founders left to form like Consensus and Parity and a lot of other stuff. And that's helped expand the ecosystem. And I think that trend has just been continuing, where people will be kind of alumni from the foundation and then depart to do other things. Like I think Alex Vandesand recently announced that he would be leaving the Ethereum Foundation to do a lot of the work he's been developing on identity stuff.
Cool. So is the role of the Ethereum Foundation then to like attract people to the ecosystem and train them or something? Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
No, I would say, well, actually, yeah, that's part of it. Really, the edict of the Ethereum Foundation is to fund and develop and spread the word and educate those in the community about Ethereum for the purpose of growing Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as what that means specifically, we're kind of changing into, as I has explained in a few different talks, into an organization that helps uh, gather developers or projects and gives them grant funding and provides them resources on how to raise money and how to better develop their program and kind of open our like ecosystem support network that we have, and just kind of spin them out into sub projects for the community. Whereas before, the Ethereum Foundation kind of had this model of, you know, a lot of in-house groups that didn't have a lot of transparency around their funding situation or
Sure.
how they were going to continue on or for how long they were going to be getting funding. Now it's kind of like many of these groups are going to be in the same pool as grant recipients, except for ones that are very necessary to be continually funded. So that's going to put everybody more on an even playing field, I believe, and help to push the edict forward to educate, develop, fund the Ethereum network.
Makes sense. So you're pretty optimistic about bullish on the future of Ethereum, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. We're coming up to an hour, so I want to kind of just transition into a bit of a rapid fire question mode, if that's okay.
Yeah, do it.
All right. First question is, what advice do you have for newcomers to the Ethereum ecosystem?
Find someone who's been in the ecosystem and have them train you up into what resources to find and what you need.
And how do people get started doing that? Like, where should they start?
You can find people on Reddit and Twitter is probably the biggest public-facing ones. If you're a developer, get started by talking to people on Gitter for a coding project or a repository on GitHub and filing issues or solving issues by coding.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, that's people sometimes forget that Ethereum is an open source project and it's permissionless. And the best way to start, especially as a developer, is to dive in and not, there's no gatekeepers, right? You're not like waiting to be hired or waiting for permission. You just start contributing. I like the mentor advice as well. That's part of how I got into Ethereum as well. And that worked really well for me. Mm-hmm. Sweet. Okay. Next question is, this is super open-ended. This is like the open mic moment. What is the one message that you would like to share with the Ethereum community?
Be nice to each other. We are grounded on being realistic, pragmatic, not, gatekeepers or people who are going to bash a bunch of other projects and stuff like that, and just keep perspective.
I like that. I can't think of any better advice, actually. What other teams or projects or people do you think we should speak to as part of Humans of Ethereum? Again, it's, like people who are a little bit less well-known or a little bit less well-funded, that kind of theme.
It'd be interesting, especially for the type of how you have the setup to talk to Telegraph or fsignals.org people.
Okay.
So they're one group. Another one, you talked to Austin, right?
Yes, he was Austin actually he's the Genesis episode.
Excellent. Yeah, Austin's great. And talking to Roman Storm from Tornado Cash would be another one that would be very interesting to hear about.
That sounds awesome. I am not familiar with Roman, so that sounds like perfect candidate. I like that. Thank you. Tell us about the Hudson beard. I saw a photo of you from a few years back without a beard, and I like. If it's okay with you, I'll share it in the episode notes here. I was like, holy crap, like who is this person? When did the beard get started?
The beard got started when I was finishing college. I think it was like my last year of college, and I just was kind of tired of shaving it. I talked to my wife because she makes a lot of my style decisions because I cannot do that for myself. And I was like, would a beard look good? And she was like, try it out. And so I did it, and she's okay with it being pretty long as it's well kept.
Right.
And she's happy, I'm happy.
I should also post a photo of me with a beard. So if I'm posting a photo of you without one, I had one for a while before getting into Ethereum, and it's a lot of work to maintain, but
yeah,
definitely form of self-expression, I guess you could say.
Totally.
The Hudson beard. You know Andreas Antonopoulos, kind of the Mastering Bitcoin, Mastering Ethereum author.
Oh yeah, I'm friends with Andreas.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. He has a personal brand built around the shape of his hair.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like it's like on his like Discord channel, and like it's on his like YouTube channel, etc. I feel like you could just have like just the beard as like your personal brand,
Someone made, well, as a joke while I was at USA, someone made Hudscoin, and it was like a black like silhouette image of
Right.
my head and beard. It was really great.
I like it. Maybe one of our listeners can get on that and permissionlessly contribute it.
Yes, yes.
Cool. All right. Final question is, I've seen on Twitter recently that the community has been attacked by a Sybil attack of hordes of different Hudson Jamesons and Hudson Jamesons and all sorts of other permutations of your name. What is up with that?
So there was this argument going on between a few different people, and it was starting to get heated. And according to someone else, their words, Hudson, submitted the most chaotic neutral tweet that has ever been tweeted, where during the argument, I just posted a GIF of a Fritos commercial, like someone throwing chili cheese Fritos at another person, and just put that in there. And then everyone was like, oh, Hudson's in this now. So they started talking to me, and we kept trolling back and forth until Zach from White Block changed their name to Hudson Jameson and changed their icon to Hudson Jameson, and then started posting things that I would never say and never post and never be mean to people about. But Zach's a pretty big troll. So after Zach did it, so did Eric from White Block, and then Joseph DeLong and a bunch of other people. At one point, it was up to 10 people who were variations of Hudson.
I think someone asked me to do it as well, and I was kind of scratching my head. It was funny because I just happened to not be on Twitter for a couple of days. I think I was traveling, and I opened my Twitter feed. This was like 3 days ago, maybe, and it was exactly what you described. It was because they changed the photos as well.
Yeah.
And someone had said something, and I was like, "That's not something Hudson would say." Right. And I looked more closely. I was like, wait a second. I was like, that's not Hudson. And I was kind of blown away. So
I had to explain to my mom, because she was like, well, you've been really active on Twitter. And I said, Mom, that's not me. And she was like, oh, I was worried about that because you were saying some things that seemed like really controversial. And I was like, no, that was other people.
Yeah. Well, much love to Zach and Dean and all the other trolls. I think the meme generators, let's call them. I think that's kind of what keeps crypto Twitter like healthy from my perspective.
Yep. I agree.
Hudson, thank you. This has been such a blast. It's so much fun catching up with you and learning more about your story. Thanks for sharing with us and taking all this time.
Thanks. I'm going to plug some stuff now.
Do it. Sweet. Right. And I will see you at DevCon, and I'm sure we'll chat soon before that.
Absolutely. I have a podcast I do with some friends. It is a tabletop role-playing game podcast and set in the Star Wars universe called Tabletop Squadron. We have a blast on there. I play what was basically a Wookiee, and we go on crazy adventures and stuff like that. And you can also find all my contact info at hudsonjameson.com. I'm on Twitter and a bunch of other places.
Sweet. So send me links for those things, and I'll make sure that they make it into the show notes down here.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Hudson. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed speaking to Hudson. Tune in again next week for a special bonus episode of Humans of Ethereum with a mystery guest, which will also be the final episode of this season 1 of the show. As always, Humans of Ethereum is completely volunteer produced and funded, so if you are interested in contributing time or funds to the project, there is information in the show notes below on how to do that. Thanks, and I will see you back here next week.